Good morning and welcome to today's verse. Today's verse comes to us from the book of Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6. And it reads as follows: Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each other. A good verse for today because it's a very practical verse that we can put into practice, that we should put into practice each and every day. We have the Apostle Paul here speaking to the church at Colossae, reminding the followers of Christ how they ought to conduct themselves, and in this manner, how they ought to speak to one another, not only to believers, but to all men. Notice that this verse, it answers the important question of who, what, when, and how. The first portion of it answers the question of who. It says, let your speech. Speaking of to the Christians, to the followers of Christ, we are the ones. Let your speech. We have an obligation and a responsibility to reflect the things of God, not only in our conduct, but especially in the things that come out of our mouth. For what comes out of our mouth is a reflection of what's in our heart. So it says, let your speech always, so he answers the questions of when. When should our speech be filled with grace? It should always be. It is the manner that we should speak. It's a common manner that we should speak every day, all day, that our heart should be filled with the things of God, with the mind of Christ, that we would speak always be filled with grace. That it says again, let your speech always be with grace. Grace, that is the kindness and those things that are gracious, those things that are considerate of other people. This is the manner in which we should speak. There ought to be a difference. You can tell where a person is from based upon their speech, their dialect, their accent. You can tell, even if they're speaking the same language, even if they're speaking English, you can tell a person is from South Africa. You can tell if they're from Germany or some European country. You can tell if they are of an Asian persuasion just based upon their dialect and their accent that they may have. You know where they're from. And the same is true for those of us who are believers or followers of Christ. You can tell who we are, whose we are, based upon our speech, based upon the words that are coming out of our mouth. Notice the difference in those who are followers of Christ and those that are unbelievers. We find in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 10, verse 12, it says this: the words of a wise man's mouth are gracious, but the lips of a fool shall swallow him up. Again, you can tell who a person is, or who's a person, who they belong to, based upon what's coming out of their mouth. So let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt. So it answers the question of what? Not only is it to be filled with grace, but seasoned with salt. For those of you that cook, now you don't have to be Bobby Flay, but those of you that cook and are good cooks, you know that food is just not that palatable if it's not seasoned properly. And salt is an enhancer. Salt enhances food. So in a similar way, that our speech should be seasoned with salt. That is, that it should be palatable to those that hear it, that they would want to hear it, and they would want to hear it if we're speaking things that would be encouraging, things that would lift them up. They would be drawn to you. It would give you an opportunity to share Christ and share the gospel to them based upon the interaction, the things that they see in you. That you're not speaking as people that are in the world that will speaking of things that are not seasoned, things that have nothing to do with life itself, that would be things of coarse language, of dirty jokes or things of that nature. But your speech would be the type of speech that would be seasoned with salt, that would enhance those that would hear it. And notice, okay, we have the who, we have the when and the what, and notice the how at the end of the verse. It says, that you may know how you ought to answer each other. I pray that you would meditate upon this verse, that you would put this verse into action and that you would apply it each and every day. So when should you speak? When should your speech be filled with grace? Always. And how that it shall be seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer one another. To God be the glory for the great things he has done. I pray that you would have a wonderful day and that you would meditate upon this verse and that you would put this verse into practice, that others who do not know the Lord, that they may be drawn to God through the grace of God that they see in you and that they hear in your speech. Amen.